18-year-old boy flying a kite on the steep slopes of Vintém Hill followed his lost string down into the damp brush. He found two bodies. The two men were laid out side by side. They were dressed in matching formal suits, shielded from the weather by waterproof raincoats. But covering their eyes were crude, heavy blindfolds cut from sheet lead. They had no eye holes. Around them lay a scattering of highly specific, mundane items: an empty mineral water bottle, a plastic bag containing 2 wet towels, and a small notebook. Inside that notebook were a few equations and a list of cryptic instructions. 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal, mask. Formal suits, heavy metal blindfolds, a strict timeline involving capsules and waiting for a signal. This was an engineered sequence of events waiting for a trigger. This photograph shows the exact kind of work the victims, Miguel José Viana and Manoel Pereira da Cruz, did for a living. They were not drifters. They were highly competent, grounded electronics technicians from a neighboring town running a successful repair business. 3 days before they were found, they left home carrying millions of cruzados in cash, a small fortune, telling their families they were going to buy electronic supplies and a used car. Instead, they traveled to Niterói. They stopped at a local shop to buy those matching raincoats, and then went to a bar to purchase a bottle of mineral water. The waitress who served them noted that Miguel was highly anxious, repeatedly checking his watch to track the time. But before they left for the hill, they did something remarkably ordinary. They made sure to keep the receipt for the water, so they could return the empty bottle later for a deposit refund. People walking to their deaths do not save receipts for bottle deposits. The victims fully intended to come back down that hill. Because the timeline of their final hours was so well documented, police assumed they were dealing with a highly solvable case. They just needed the toxicology report. The answers should have been waiting right here, inside the local coroner's office. Instead, this is where the entire investigation collapsed. A high-profile murder had brought another body into the morgue that same morning. The medical examiner was completely swamped with work. Miguel and Manuel's bodies were pushed aside, left sitting unattended in a humid facility for weeks. Biology took its course. By the time the autopsy was finally conducted, their internal organs had decomposed to a point where testing was impossible. A toxicology report to identify the mysterious capsules from the notebook was never run. Without a biological baseline, there is no way to know if they were poisoned, if they overdosed, or suffered a sudden medical event. Stripped of that biological context, every physical object at the crime scene instantly loses its objective meaning. This vacuum of evidence gave birth to 2 entirely different realities. The first is scientific spiritualism. Investigators learned the men belonged to an underground esoteric movement, a group attempting to contact extraterrestrial entities and spirits using a mix of radio equipment and psychedelic drugs. 2 months before they hiked up the hill, a homemade electrical device exploded in Manuel's backyard. Even stranger, 4 years prior, another local television technician was found dead on a nearby hilltop, and he too was wearing a lead mask. But you can look at the exact same crime scene and see earthly malice. The massive stack of cash the men brought to buy a car was completely missing. Their wristwatches had been unbuckled and strangely tucked inside their own pockets. Years later, an imprisoned criminal named Hamilton Bazzani offered a confession. He claimed local thugs knew about the money, lured the technicians to the hill under the guise of a spiritualist experiment, forced them to take poison, and robbed them blind. Because the organs rotted away in the morgue, police are paralyzed. A cosmic miscalculation and a calculated, cold-blooded murder perfectly fit the exact same set of physical clues. Look at the wet towels and the waterproof coats. They could be specific equipment for shielding against the atmospheric fallout of a glowing UFO, or they could simply be the arbitrary, distracting demands of a con artist building trust before a robbery. The lead masks and the ingested capsules operate exactly the same way. Are they protective gear for a blinding, psychedelic encounter with another dimension, or are they blindfolds and poison forced down the victims' throats at gunpoint? There is no tiebreaker. The truth of Vintém Hill wasn't stolen by a perfect crime or a government cover-up. It was permanently erased by a clerical delay in a busy morgue. The enduring horror of the lead masks case is the absolute fragility of reality. A single overwhelmed medical examiner was enough to sever our understanding of the facts, turning a solvable crime scene into a permanent void, leaving us with one final tragic image. Two men lying side by side in the freezing rain, blinded by lead, shrouded in absolute darkness, waiting for a signal that either never came or was the last thing they ever saw. In August 1966, a young boy retrieving a kite on Vintém Hill in Brazil found two men lying side by side on the brush. They wore formal suits and matching raincoats, but their faces were partially obscured by heavy, crude masks cut from solid lead and fitted tightly over their eyes. Investigators found a small notebook in one of their pockets containing a set of precise instructions. 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals, await signal mask. Identifying those capsules required immediate forensic work, but the Niterói coroner's office was at a standstill. The murder of a high-ranking local detective that same morning had paralyzed the department. The bodies from the hill were left waiting on stone tables in a humid room, while other cases took priority. By the time the medical examiner finally performed the autopsies weeks later, the internal organs had completely decomposed and were discarded without being tested. Since the police had no toxicology reports to identify the capsules, the official cause of death was marked as indeterminate. This procedural collapse left the police with no physical data to analyze. Without chemical evidence to explain the deaths, the investigation was forced to rely on the strange testimony of the victims' associates, shifting the focus from forensic science to the victim's psychological reality. In their hometown, Miguel José Viana and Manoel Pereira da Cruz were respected professionals. They operated a shop repairing television sets and radios, working daily with the grounded, practical hardware of mid-century electronics. But their private lives were occupied by something else. The two men were members of a local subculture known as scientific spiritualism. This group believed that spirits and extraterrestrials could be contacted through a specific methodology. They theorized that by combining artificial electromagnetic fields with altered mental states induced by psychedelic drugs, they could transform the human brain into a receiver for otherworldly signals. These experiments were often dangerous. Months before their deaths, Miguel and Manuel joined an associate named Elcio Gomez for a test at Atafona Beach. Whatever device they activated that night triggered a massive explosion that shook the ground for miles and prompted an official investigation by the Brazilian Navy. Their obsession had moved them past radio repair and into volatile pseudoscience. They were mixing high-voltage engineering with unregulated substances, convinced they were on the verge of a breakthrough. This context brings us back to the night of August 17th. Around the time Miguel and Manuel climbed Vintém Hill, a local woman named Gracinda de Souza was driving through the neighborhood with her children. She stopped her car to watch a massive, ovoid craft hovering silently above the hill. She described it glowing with an intense orange light and a red ring that emitted blue rays in multiple directions. For those who believe the men were attempting contact, the lead eyepieces served a specific purpose. They were constructed as radiation shields, intended to protect the men's retinas from the blinding luminosity they expected the craft to emit. This theory suggests the men successfully executed their protocol, ingesting the capsules to reach a receptive state and waiting for a signal. Their deaths would then be the result of either intense radiation exposure from the craft or an accidental overdose of the substances they took to facilitate the encounter. This narrative accounts for the masks, the note, and the timing of the sightings. To accept it, however, requires prioritizing eyewitness accounts of the paranormal over earthly logic. A different explanation relies on a piece of evidence that the paranormal theory ignores. The focus on the masks distracts from what was missing from the men's pockets. Before their trip, Miguel and Manuel told their families they were going to the city to buy a used car. They were carrying roughly 3 million Brazilian cruzeiros, a fortune representing years of savings. When the bodies were found, the majority of that money was gone. Their watches had also been removed from their wrists and placed carefully inside their suit pockets. These details point toward a calculated confidence trap. Someone aware of their cash and their occult interests likely lured them to the hill under the guise of an experiment. The instructions to ingest capsules at 1830 provided the killer with a window to administer lethal poison disguised as a spiritual sacrament. The perpetrator used the victim's own beliefs to ensure they would lie down willingly, blindfold themselves with lead, and swallow the poison without a struggle. This left behind a staged scene designed to baffle the police, while the killer walked away with the money. The mystery of Vintém Hill persists because a systemic police failure destroyed the physical evidence, allowing a terrestrial murder to remain forever obscured by the lead masks.